I believe systems ago.
I believe systems ago.
Butterscotch.
Warning. Anything can happen on this show. Profanity and bad advice are guaranteed, so this show should not be listened to by anyone. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 50 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Sam.
And today is May 17th, 2016.
And today
What's
is
going
also
on?
the day where you might have noticed that the entire intro to this whole podcast just felt different.
What are we doing? Changing things up on episode 50.
Yeah, well, we realized something important, which is if we put the warning after the intro,
Then I don't get to
Then-
say fuck whenever I want, which is
Yeah.
really not
I
acceptable.
mean, is that even living?
No.
Really? Yeah. So let's get right into the meat of today's topic, which is that Adam can't see things in his mind.
Wait, is this the whole topic for the entirety of the thing?
It will shockingly become so, I think.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So let's hear about it.
So, long story short, we were forwarded an article by a scientist man, or I guess about a scientist man, who did this study where they were asking people about their ability to picture images in their head. And so the idea was that you end up at the end of the study, kind of like a personality test or something, where you answer a bunch of these questions and they give you, of course, a score of what you would classify as your ability to actually mentally prepare an image for yourself to look at. The example they gave, I believe, in the article was about being able to picture a sunset. And then now I want you to add a cloud floating in front of that sunset, and then a rainbow arcing out of the cloud and going down into a dragon's mouth that then eats the sun, etc. And so they go through this process.
Pretty elaborate.
It ends up being an LSD trip, actually, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But so they go through this whole process, and they were very confused because they did this with quite a few people, and they found that some people were self-reporting that they couldn't see it. They couldn't see a thing in their mind's eye. And Adam, as it turns out, is one of those people.
I'm one of those people. There's
What's the word? Did they give you a word for your
what was it?
for your condition?
I think they call it.
Aphantasia.
Oh, I was going to say not being able to see things in your mind person, but that
Yeah,
doesn't
I think
have
it's
a
called
good medical ring to it that is
Yeah,
required.
aphantasia is essentially the inability to fantasize, so to speak.
So to speak.
Yeah, you can't conjure images of anything in your mind, which is interesting because it also explains a lot about Adam's general memory problems.
Yeah, people always gave me shit for the entirety of my life because they were like, "You can't remember anything," and I'm like, "I know this, but I don't know."
How are you guys remembering
Yeah,
stuff?
I didn't understand why everybody else was just remembering things all the time. Like, as far as I'm concerned, my life has only existed since this very moment, which means when I started that sentence, that's already a part of my life that no longer exists.
But you do remember facts extremely well.
I remember lots of facts, but I think it's because I have no choice. Like, it's the only way I can piece together the world and my history is by a long list of facts, and so I'm pretty good at stringing those things together and keeping them in my brain when I choose to.
Well, so here's a question for you, because I think it's a super weird thing, and the reality is that like 49 out of every 50 people who listen to this episode will be like, "What? I can make pictures in my brain? I don't get it. What's the problem?"
What does that even mean?
So
well,
what does that
I think
mean?
here's the most concise and weirdest example of this is, so I've been with my wife for a decade, but if we were to sit down like at a restaurant right across from the table each other, and if I were to look right into her eyeballs and then close my eyes, I can no longer, like, I have no picture of her face in my mind at all. I can't see what she looks like
or anything.
literally anything in the entire room. And in fact, like, moving around in the world, it's like, and I didn't really, you can think of it actually like in video games where the only part of the world that exists is the part that you can see because the rest has to be destroyed behind you to conserve memory, right? So for me, it's the same way. Like when I blink, the world is destroyed for a moment, and then I open my eyes again. And there it is, recreated from nothing, right?
But you know if things move, right? If
Yeah,
the
but
picture
so I
has
still
changed.
kind of know. Well, it depends on how much it's changed.
Because you know when you open your eyes that Jenny is still Jenny, that you're
Yeah. So like, I'm never like, I know what she looks like, so I'm never surprised when I see my wife, right? And if somebody who looked an awful lot like her stood beside her, I'd still know which one was my wife. So like, I'm not surprised when I see stuff. Like, I know what it, like, my brain knows what it looks like, but it can't can't show me what a thing looks like.
What if she were replaced while you blinked by an evil twin who had just a small mole on her upper lip? Would you?
Oh, if it was on her, like I would notice that. It would have to be, but there are lots of other things that I absolutely wouldn't remember. So like, if her hair was suddenly parted on the opposite side, for example, I wouldn't notice.
It's a clear sign of being evil.
I know exactly, because she becomes a mirror image, right? The evil mirror image.
So it's not about being unable to remember things. It's about at will being unable to summon an image.
Yeah, and it's so impossible because it's not even just like that the image fades or something like that. It's just there literally isn't one. So if I just close my eyes right now, I literally can't picture anything that's in front of me. I know what's there. Like when I open them up again, I'm not surprised at what I see. Right, everything is where I expect. But it is the case that the world around me, I mostly kind of don't really know what's there, and I never really understood why that was the case. Like I can never remember where I put things, or what's in drawers and cabinets and the refrigerator and whatever. But when I open those things, I automatically reach for the right spot where a thing would be, as long as it's consistently kept in the same spot.
So I'm wondering though, because it's an interesting problem, right? Because most people know that there's basically two modes. To simplify, there's basically two modes that your brain has. One is your conscious one, and one is your subconscious one, right? And the truth of the matter is that your conscious brain, the thing that sort of is you on a large base that feels like it's you, is constantly being fed information by your unconscious part. And I'm wondering because the reality is, you know what Jenny looks like. You do. Your brain knows. But for
you
some
somehow
reason,
have a model of that.
you do.
there's
But
a
for some
model in
reason,
there.
you don't get to touch it. Your subconscious is like, nah, man, I'm keeping these. I'm keeping these for me. This is for me and not for you. Also, all those landmarks that you needed when you were traveling the other day. Nah, I got those on lock in here. You could just think about them as a list.
You just memorize a set of steps instead.
Yeah, I have to memorize paths to get places. But it's even like with landmarks and stuff. Again, people will give me shit because if I were to drive on, some route in some direction, if I were to drive that route every day for a year, and then for the first time in that year, now turn around and try to take the opposite of that exact same path, the whole thing would look impossibly different to me because my brain hasn't taken like pictures that it can then kind of like reorient so that now I know what's expected to be where in the opposite direction. It just looks like a completely foreign landscape, and so I get lost really easily because I don't recognize landmarks unless they're just literally in exactly the same position that my brain expects them to be.
What I think is the most amazing thing about all this is, in learning about this, it seems like people who have this condition, because this is a new discovery, actually.
Yeah, like as of a
that
week
this is a
ago.
thing. And even though people who have this condition have been among us forever,
They've been walking among us.
and
Like lizard people.
Yep.
yeah, it's possible that they are lizard people,
Just like Ted Cruz.
Adam. But
Yeah,
but
he's
what's
a
amazing
serial
is because this is something that's completely internal, then people with aphantasia have always just assumed that when somebody says, picture in your mind this scene, they always thought it was metaphorical.
Yeah,
But
I'm still
not-
convinced
not-
it's metaphorical because I can't imagine perceiving something in my mind because that would require perceiving something in my mind,
Right, and there's nothing in there.
and there's nothing in there. So I have no way to even think about what it would be like to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well,
and then,
so-
of course, on the flip side of it, the 49 and 50 people who don't have this situation it never occurred to anybody that this would be a thing that you couldn't do.
Yeah,
It's
So I
weird.
wonder what
Very weird.
other things fall into this category, right? Because
there must be other stuff.
that we all just assume that everybody can do, but really,
I think it's probably like most of the stuff that you experience, right? You just assume that like there's always a large assumption that other people, and this is part of the large thing about learning empathy, is the realization that most people are feeling completely different things from you in all actuality, even though for some reason you tend to just like project yourself all over onto everybody's business, right?
Yeah, but then
just
not only
natural.
that, the way that they perceive the world is just totally different. I mean, the whole
Right, like-
idea of like in the colorblind situation where we say things like as me as a person who sees in three colors, I can say something like, isn't it weird that a person who can only see two colors can't see what I call white, because white is made out of three colors, right? When that doesn't even actually make sense as a thing to say, because because that's true in like a weird kind of mathy way, I guess. But the fact is that we just literally perceive totally different things about the world. Like the
What's
entire
even weirder
model
is that
different.
it could technically be, I mean, it's possible to also see ultraviolet and infrared and whatever. And
Or
we never
polarized
sit around
light.
and be like, we never sit around and go, it's so weird that we just can't see X-rays. You know?
Right.
Like,
Crazy.
but it is kind of weird.
Well, it's not that weird because if we were looking at X-rays, we would just go blind as a consequence.
Unless we were really well equipped.
But I guess
to handle
what
that.
other things do you guys think fall in this category? Because I know, and also the funny thing is that this has happened to Adam before, where something from his childhood or early years that everyone sort of like was picking on him before turned out to be a serious medical thing at the end of the day. the other of which was his freaking eye, which growing up, Adam was always rubbing his eye, and mom and dad were like, would you stop it?
They called it making faces. They were like, stop making faces.
Because Adam's always just rubbing his fist in his eye socket because it hurt. And then he always got migraines. And everyone's like, just give him some coffee and call it good. And we all know from a few episodes how that turned out that one time.
Yeah.
But it's the sort of thing
It's a
where,
dark path.
as it turned out, in his college years, from reading books a bunch of times, Adam started going cross-eyed, right?
Well, I was going cross-eyed. I mean, I was cross-eyed the whole time. It was just mild enough and I was physiologically capable of uncrossing my eyes enough that it was just fairly subtle, right? So like if somebody was looking at me, it would look like I was looking straight. But in reality, I was constantly expending energy to try to keep my eyes uncrossed.
You were flexing your eye biceps.
Yeah, literally constantly. My eye biceps were
Or
constantly
iceps,
flexed.
if you will.
Yeah, and the consequence of that was just eventually my eye biceps just got tired. They were like, "Fuck this! I don't want to do this anymore." So when I was in high school, they just decided to stop. And so if I was like looking a little bit off center, they would just literally give up and let my eye come in. And then my brain would ignore everything that was coming in from that eye. So I didn't know that I was cross-eyed because I was only seeing out of one eyeball. My brain just filled in the rest, right? Because that's what brains do. And so my brain didn't even alert me to the fact that it was purposely making me blind in one eye. And yeah, then the rest basically all fell out from there.
This is a situation of your brain being like, dude, I got this.
Right. Which
Don't worry about
is, I mean, that's helpful if you're back in like caveman times where there's nothing you can do about the situation. But in modern times, had my brain been like, hey, by the way, you're blind in this eye right now, then I could be like, oh, I should maybe go visit a modern eyeball specialist of some form and get this addressed, which I then ended up doing by having surgery to correct and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is, it's still a thing that bothers me now. But it only bothers me now because I know what it is. I know exactly what it is that's happening. I can feel it happening because I'm now aware of it, which in some ways is worse. And actually, this whole awareness that I can't form images thing.
Is it pissing you off?
Well, now that I'm aware of it, it's something that I can't not notice. I mean, for example, when my wife and I were looking at houses in St. Louis, since we're going to be moving there, I became very aware suddenly that anytime I walked into a new room, because I wasn't familiar with it, I hadn't memorized where stuff was yet, that I would walk through a door and then literally have no idea what was behind me or where I was in the space of the house, because I hadn't experienced it enough to like map out the world in some sort of a model in my brain, and I had no visual perception of where I had just been.
Does this cause in you any sort of anxiety? Because like I feel like kidnapping you and like putting you in a structure with shifting walls and doors.
Yeah, but that would suck for anybody.
It would
I
suck
know,
for
but it would
anybody.
suck especially more for Adam.
But here's the thing: it actually, in some ways, it does, and in some ways, it doesn't, right? Because I had to deal with this literally my entire life, that just not actually having any idea what was around me. Anytime I go outside of my normal environment, and as a consequence, my brain has clearly found lots of ways to deal with this without ever alerting me to this fact.
Wait, I have a question.
That it was a problem.
Is there a potential strength in this? So like if I watch a scary movie or like read a scary story even, and then the room's dark, I'm like I could count the number of teeth on the beasts that are coming at me from the closet. Like is it?
Yeah, your brain starts conjuring up all kinds of horrifying images of what might
are
be
you?
in the darkness.
Does that not happen to you?
It does, but not in really an image sense. It's more of like it's
get
a
a
fear
creep
of the
feels?
events that could happen, right? So it's like a fear of the pain that could happen to me if a mini teeth monster happened to exist. And
But
was
can
in
you
the closet.
see? That's probably a dumb question. Can you see can you see the event? Like, do you see your own blood splattered on the ceiling, or is it just that you're
No,
like,
I mean, no, I don't. Like,
there would be blood splatters?
Yeah, it's more like that, or it's like imagining the feeling of being eaten alive, right? Much more so than like seeing it happen, which obviously also wouldn't be very pleasant.
Is this why sometimes when I describe like a creature or something that I want to make, you just kind of look at me?
Dude, I totally ignore the entire.
I want to do something like this, and Adam's like,
My answer is always that sounds fine, and then it's not until
Because
I get to look at the picture that I can actually make a decision about it.
because it sounds fine. 'Cause the sound of it is the only thing you can.
Yeah, well, this was the interesting thing is when I was reading another account of some guy who he's actually an author who realized that he has the same thing, and somebody was asking him, they were like, because in his books he's very descriptive about stuff, and they were really confused by this, and he's like, well, I still know what kinds of things go places, right? He's like, I can conjure up a place just as well as anybody else can. He's like, I don't picture it in my brain when I do it.
You can just.
But
just
I can
describe
still,
it
yeah,
and
I can
stuff.
still invent and describe a space. And he's like, and I just do it because that's how everybody writes. Like, he's like, as far as I'm concerned, that was a writing style. He's like, he didn't know as the author that when people are reading his work, they're actually converting what he's written into imagery in their minds. And for him, when he reads, and then he described this, and I was like, oh, this is exactly how I read, right? When he reads and gets to those parts of books that describe the shit out of stuff, he just skims through it. And this is how I read too. Like I when I'm reading, I skip nearly all content that isn't about events and like dialogue and and people doing stuff. Because I like if you were to tell me what a character looks like in the beginning, I have literally no idea in the next page what you just described that character to look like, except for in the vague senses, or unless I buckle down and really try to memorize the details.
So I guess the question I have is it the case that something like this is a genuine deficiency in that it is, say, literally impossible, like you're missing some connection or something, for example, to be able to push imagery into your conscious mind, which is basically what's supposed to be happening. Is it that you're like missing a circuit, or is it the case that this is somehow your brain
Like a
went
skill
about
or something?
Yeah, it's a skill that your brain went about just like didn't use, and therefore you literally don't have the capacity to do it, but it's a trainable thing.
I have no idea. It's one of those things that it seems like, given how important imagery is to being able to to remember stuff and to understand where you are and to accomplish all kinds of things, it seems like it's one of those things that if you could do it, your brain would absolutely be doing it all the time. And maybe
I
that's
don't know.
not
I don't
true,
know how
but-
I don't know how you would conceivably force yourself to do it, because for everybody else it just happens.
Yeah,
Like, you're not
right.
Right.
like,
Even if
when
it happens
somebody-
poorly, that's one
Well,
thing.
there's a book called "Don't Think of an Elephant," and it's all about how you can basically force people to think about things by telling them not to think of things.
Boy, Adam, when someone says "don't think of an elephant," do you just think of the word elephant?
No,
the
I mean,
vague concept.
Was it?
of an
Because
elephant?
it's not the same as like just thinking in words or something. Because I still think in, I guess I would call it objects. So like when you say picture an elephant, what I get is a sort of like vague sense of the object of an elephant, like not the word. And not a picture of it, but sort of like you can think of it as like
the essence.
It's like a sketchy outline of like suddenly like kind of flashing through it a whole bunch of different perspectives of what an elephant is like, right? So like what I get is a sort of flash of like a sense of shape and color and like the noise that comes from an elephant, like in the size, like so it's sort of like it's almost a series of descriptures kind of captured in a kind of
flip book.
a vague object. Really, from a programming perspective, right? Where there's a huge difference between when you're making a video game, you describe an object using code, and that description is enough to then cast a character onto the screen for somebody to look at. So to me, the difference is basically
having the mind be the monitor versus being the code.
Exactly. So having access to the object code versus having access to the thing that it projects. And it seems that I only have access to that. So my guess is that I have kind of like the same functionality as anybody else, except that I can't cast that part. But in terms of being able to like the way I think about stuff and so on, it has the same underlying part, right. I think, probably. But I don't have that other level.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Except where were you going with the elephant thing?
I don't remember.
Unlike elephants that can remember everything.
I think
Right.
So I've been reading this book called Peak, which just came out and was pointed out via the Freakonomics podcast, which Racing for the Finish, one of our Butterscotch ID members, had suggested we listen to. And the whole book is it's written by the scientist and a scientist writer about the science of expertise and what we're slowly starting to learn about how people get better at stuff. And the reason I'm reading this, of course, is going back to some of our other podcasts, is that I've been trying to train up my art capability. So one interesting thing from this book that I read was that they literally only recently found out, sort of in a scientific fashion. And this surprised the shit out of me to learn this, actually. As in, like 30 years ago, it was largely believed that you kind of were what you were. And if you couldn't do art or something, well, too bad. That's not your thing. And there's the one.
Was that really
example,
believed, or was that the common sense that
was
the
the
public
common
has,
sense? Yeah.
or that scientists had?
It was basically both.
Okay.
Supposedly.
Wasn't
And
it also
so-
the case that 40 years ago or 50 years ago, doctors advised people to avoid exercise
And smoke
because
more.
we can just agree that the world was a dumber place.
It was a
while
rough
ago.
time for everyone.
Nobody knew anything.
But so the first study that this guy did was back in the 70s that sort of caused a bit of a ruckus. Was that there's large idea that you have in working memory capacity, right? Working memory for most people is sort of the mental workbench you have for handling memories or handling thoughts. So for most people, you can handle about 7 things. For some reason, it's just magic number 7. But it goes from between 4 and 9, depending on sort of how flexible your brain is. And this is directly correlated, like working memory capacity is directly correlated with perceived overall intelligence, because the more stuff you can cram in at once, usually the more insights you can raise, the more parallels you can draw, that sort of thing. So this guy had this question where the idea was that in no time in scientific history prior to this guy's thing, had anyone been able to memorize a string of digits, supposedly, and this is again just blowing my mind, that in a scientific research paper that was more than 10, using this practice technique where they would list out a digit one at a time, and then after the guy was done listing all the digits, you'd have to repeat them back. So he would, and that's in a 1 second interval. So he'd say like 1, 4, 7, 1, 2, whatever the hell, and you just keep going. And literally, like up until this point, they were convinced that the maximum capacity for any human ever was 7 things, because no one really had gotten much beyond that. And so he sat down with this. They recruited a student. They sat down, and then every day or every other day, the student would come in for an hour and they would practice. And so he would read out a list of digits, and then the student would have to try to match them. And
For a whole hour.
For a whole hour. And for the first 4 days, like
That sounds tedious as
the guy
fuck.
was the guy was super excited. He was like a runner. He's very, a very motivated dude. He was super excited. And then by the 4th day, and this is supposed to be an experiment that lasted like 3 months. By the 4th day, he had made no progress. He was still stuck at 7. And he was like, I don't see how this is going to go anywhere. And the guy's like, I just need you to just keep coming back. Like, I swear to God, I think it'll work. And so the guy starts developing his own sort of mnemonic devices in the background, right? The runner does, the student. On the Friday, he came in and got 9. And they were like, huh. And then the experiment just kept going on and on and on. And every time he hit one of these walls at like 20 numbers, for example, then after a few practice sessions, he would figure out some other way to hold the information mentally. And by the time they were done, after 2 years, he could do 81 digits. So that's a minute. That's like a minute and a half of someone every second just telling you a number and then him just recounting it perfectly afterward. And the thing that blew everyone's mind about it was the fact that the guy was able to improve, right? Because up until then, it was this idea was like, you have your brain you have, and that's just what it is. And
But
so,
he didn't actually improve at memorizing numbers. He developed an encoding scheme that his mind was good at using memory for, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
right.
that's the key to this whole thing is that memorizing shit like a bunch of numbers is very hard because the only image you have of it is sort of equivalent to the thing, right? So like,
yeah, it's an abstract concept.
it's an abstract concept. So if you want to memorize a string of numbers, then it becomes increasingly difficult because none of them mean anything.
Right.
But brains are really good at remembering certain things. And so if you encode those numbers into things that your brain's good at remembering.
Yeah.
And put
Then you
those in
can do it.
sequence instead. Yeah. I mean,
Well, yeah, so-
that's like the main way that people do this, right?
Well, that's the way that the entire field of mnemonics works, right? Which is that what you do. So the problem is that your short-term memory, that working memory, is so limited that essentially what you have to do is train your brain to be able to really rapidly and with a good strategy actually just store things directly into long-term memory, and that's what you're able to do because short-term memory literally doesn't last more than a couple seconds. And that's why you have to, like, if you're trying to remember a phone number or something that you just got, you have to repeat it under your breath, subvocalization. So you always repeat it constantly until you get to a place where you can write it down, because if you stop refreshing it like once, it'll go away because your short-term memory.
Because if one thing crowds out one of those digits in your short-term memory, you've lost the whole number.
But this is my entry point, getting to your inability to see pictures, the question there, because I'm wondering, like, is that an inborn phenomenon, or is that just because of some sort of quirk of however it was that your brain decided to think about things early on that sort of reinforced it constantly? Or is there actually, a fuse missing, so to speak?
I mean, who knows? But my guess would be, again, given the sort of utility of being able to image stuff, presumably since 98 out of 100 people could do it, my guess is that what my brain has done is kind of the same thing that this kid's brain did for memorizing numbers, which was because it didn't have access to that way of memorizing stuff, of like, because like I literally don't remember. I don't have imagery of like birthday parties or or major events and that kind of stuff that I can refresh in my mind to reminisce upon. Mm-hmm. But I know that events happen, and so what I've memorized is the events and miscellaneous facts about those events. And so I think what my brain has done is basically just given up on, or not given up, but basically instead of trying to use imagery to do stuff, it's just had to come up with entirely different encoding mechanisms to be able to remember things than what other people use. And so presumably what that means is that my way of approaching the world and remembering stuff about the world is probably totally different than somebody else's, because where somebody else has a system in place already that does that on their behalf, because their brain is designed to make long-term storage of images an easy task. And I don't have that. So I have to do the equivalent of having some sort of a mnemonic device for memorizing numbers, but I have to have it for everything. So I don't know what it is, because my brain's just doing it, right? But presumably what that means is that my brain actually has a totally different approach than most people to retaining information. And although for a large part, that's been to not retain it at all. Right. And so it basically, which actually makes sense, right? Because if it takes a lot of effort for me to remember stuff, then of course my brain's only going to do that for stuff that's really important. Because otherwise, why expend the effort? And then because of the short-term memory problem, it would have to actively prevent me from being able to pay attention to anything else to be able to remember most stuff. So I think what that means is I've gotten pretty good when I need to remember things at very quickly converting those into long-term storage. But I've also gotten really good at just ignoring most things and not remembering them. They just
because you don't want to cloud
slip right by. Yeah, because I don't need it. And as a consequence, I'm just very comfortable living with very few things, so I don't know what things I have anyway, right? So like I have
we always joke about how when Adam comes up to visit St. Louis, he brings a backpack, and about 3/4 of his wardrobe and all of his worldly belongings are in that backpack.
Yeah, and I only barely know what's in that backpack.
That's my favorite part.
You open it, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I've never surprised at what's in there, but I don't know what's in there necessarily.
There was this other piece in that book where he was talking about nearsightedness. And this is a huge problem for people like over the age of 50. Like I think it's more than half people over the age of 50 end up having to get some sort of reading glasses or something like that. And we know this with our parents. They're always squinting to read stuff. Or if you're in a restaurant or something, they got to get their glasses or like shove the menu in their face. And the problem is that your cornea sort of bends as you get older. It loses some of its focal capability, and that really affects your nearsightedness.
So your lens.
Yeah, your lens. Sorry. And so the issue here is that's actually a structural defect, right? And you can't repair that unless you go in and cut it or do something else to it. But these researchers had a question after they read one of these papers by this guy, where they said, what if you could train your brain to just decode the information better? So in other words, given the same blurry image, could you just train your brain to
read
de-blur
instead of letters?
Yeah. And guess what the answer is? Fuck yeah.
Probably yeah.
Fuck yeah, you can. So they brought all these.
That'll only work to an extent, because if it's the same thing as like when you're watching CSI and
that's exactly the thing. You train your brain to de-blur things, but your brain is way better at it than a computer is once you train it, right? So yeah, but they do this thing where they keep on pushing it, slightly blurrier, so you basically just train yourself to recognize what a blurry A at various degrees looks like, right? And then you could just read. People didn't even need their glasses anymore. They were seeing the same image, but their brain was interpreting it differently, right?
So they still couldn't really see, but they could read.
Yeah, technically they couldn't see any better than before, but they
probably
could
a lot of that is
perceive better.
because well, it's probably not even that either. Actually, it's because for humans, what we would actually, and of course robots could do this too if we programmed it to do it. But all the way that we understand the world is actually statistical. When your brain's trying to recognize a thing, it actually is it's a probabilistic model it puts on top of stuff, right? So if you're given a bunch of blurry letters, if they're a little blurry, then for any individual letter by itself or group of letters, if they're random, for each one of those letters, then your brain has to basically map probabilistically what the blurry thing is based on what it knows blurry versions of all the letters look like, right? As it gets blurrier, it's going to get worse and worse at that. But in the real world scenario where you're reading stuff, it actually has a lot more information than just that one.
You got context,
Because you've got context.
Right.
And so you can now look at a blurry word. And a blurry word is going to be a hell of a lot easier for your brain to map to a series of letters. And it won't actually, it'll map it directly to a word, right? And so it totally makes sense that if you get better and better at recognizing words, then as they get blurrier, then having all that contextual information available would make brains really able to do that.
Well, there's been plenty of studies that show that words that have an interesting shape, like if you were to draw an outline around the whole word, and Adam and I were talking about this with regards to the Node.js, which is a web tech, their logo, for some reason, it just looks really good. It's just the word, but it looks really good. And it's actually because, I can't remember what the word is for this concept, but the shape of the whole, like the outline that the word itself makes, if you were to trace around it, is pleasing for some reason. So it's a way easier thing to learn. It's a way easier thing to remember. Mm-hmm. But anyways, I wanted to get into this because Seth had mentioned this idea about like achieving your dreams in 30 minutes a day.
Yeah, this is something that drives me crazy. Is you often hear people talking about things that they want to achieve in their life. Big things, right? I want to be in a rock band, or I want to become a good painter, or whatever. I want to write a novel, right? And there's this figure that always gets thrown around, which I think is probably a pretty reliable idea, that you can be said to have become an expert in something once you've put at least 10,000 hours into that thing.
Well, I think by a reliable idea, you just mean you need a fuckload of hours.
Yes.
Yeah. And 10,000 is a pretty good.
It's
arbitrary.
It's a lot of hours.
If you put 10,000 hours into something, you've at least put in enough time to know what you don't know, which you've put enough time to learn a lot of stuff, to get pretty good at something, and to have enough of an understanding of the thing that you also understand the things you don't understand, if that makes sense. I don't know. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about this idea of thinking that if you really have a goal like that, to become a master at one of these things, that you can just, do it on the side. And I'm just wondering what you guys think about this, because if you actually plot it out time-wise, if you put in 30 minutes a day to achieving your dreams, it will take you 54 years to reach the 10,000 hour mark.
Yeah.
If you put in 8 hours a day, it'll only take you 3.5 years. Do you guys, do you think this is possible? It's if somebody really wants to do so I've been wanting to learn electronics and how to build robots, basically. And I have been putting basically no time into it. So it's nothing more than sort of like a foggy kind of a wish right now.
A pipe dream, if you will.
Yeah. But if I were to sit down and put in, 4 hours every weekday night and, 10 plus hours every weekend, then suddenly I'd be rapidly accelerating toward having a really strong understanding of all this stuff, right? But at 30 minutes a day, what the hell? Is this possible, do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of things here. I think one of them is a question of what your dreams are. So for example, like if I wanted to sharpen my ability to see, for example, using the nearsightedness thing, something like that you can train in like 30 minutes a day for a while, because something like that, there's a difference in complexity of a thing, I guess, is a big piece of it. So part of the reason why games are such an opaque thing to get into making is because there's so many damn elements that you can start attacking it from. You can attack from the programming side, and even when you just say that, now you're digging into that's a whole big rat's nest to figure out, right? Or the art side or whatever else. But something like a really, really specific skill, I feel like you can actually develop it really rapidly. So, for example, take like meditation as maybe an easier
Well, you
example.
you can get decent at it really rapidly.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing is you have to determine between the things, because like I have a list of things that my goal is basically to be able to do functionally, right?
Not to be an expert at.
Yeah, to be able to get decent at. And those are things that I do put like 30 minutes a day into ish. So that's running, maybe meditating. It used to be. other things like that where I'm like, I just want to get better at this, so so I'm functional, so I can go out and throw a ball to my friends that it doesn't go 3 feet and hit the ground, you know. So there's certain things like that. But if you're talking about like the dream stuff for most people, yeah, I mean, I think if you're not able to really, because those tend to be more complicated. You know, I don't know anybody whose dream is to be able to like throw a baseball 50 yards, for example, as like an easier one. But if you're talking about, the problem with a dream is usually that it's actually a ton of different parts put together, and that the time it takes to do any one of those pieces is quite large in order to achieve some level of good enough or mastery over it. And so it can get very hard to, when you look at the dream of like opening up a successful game studio, for example, it's really hard to denote what those different parts are and then put time towards those in an appropriate way. So I think you can still work toward your dreams in 30 minutes a day. Certainly, you can work towards them. Will you achieve them in a reasonable time frame? Like, no, absolutely not. But I think that's something you can recognize. Like sometimes life just doesn't permit you to do a thing for a while, and that's just kind of, if you get 30 minutes in a day and the total amount of like spare time you have in a day is 45 minutes or something, then like, you know, kudos to you for plugging away at the thing you're trying to do. Should you also maybe put those extra 15 minutes into figuring out how to get more time for that? Yes. Yes, because it's not going to go. But it does remind me of that Onion article from like 2013 titled, "Find the thing you're most passionate about, then do it on nights and weekends for the rest of your life." Right. And it's like, it's too true. It really is too true, in my opinion. Adam, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, to me, I think this question conflates a whole bunch of ideas. The main one being what it means to have a dream to do something. Because that doesn't have to be some massive, expansive thing. And even certain kinds of things, depending on the skill sets involved, it's very rare that when you go tackle a thing you want to be skilled at, that you do it from ground zero, right? Because this whole arbitrary like 10,000 hours thing, the point of that is lots of hours. And for different people, just how many hours it takes to be, and there's not like a switch. You're not just suddenly an expert, right? You're just developing expertise over time. The amount of time that it takes is going to depend a hell of a lot on your particular skill set, what you come in with, your approach to the problem in the first place. Because if you do it really ineffectively, then of course it's going to take a lot longer. So the broader point is you just need a bunch of time, right?
Well, here's a question.
But you could get away with a lot if the thing that you're trying to do doesn't require as much.
So I bought a Razor scooter when I was in college, and I still have it, and it's fucking amazing. Great way to get around. It's a good means of locomotion.
You should use one of those hoverboard things so you could break your ass, like everybody I've seen on YouTube.
I'm breaking my ankles. With a scooter, you can break your ankles much more effectively. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. But I did this kind of goofy calculation where I was like, okay, this scooter is $80. And I'm going to do a cost benefit analysis because I was learning about cost benefit analysis at the time. And I put a number on it to try to figure out how much time is this scooter going to save me. So I figured I can move about 4 times faster on the scooter on average than I can walking. And I'm walking for like 30 minutes a day to my various classes and stuff. So I'm going to be saving X number of minutes per day. And then if I crunch that out over the course of an entire semester, it comes out to so many hours, right? And so I was kind of proudly explaining this to one of our uncles. And I was like, oh yeah, like I bought this scooter and it turns out it's going to save me this amount of time. And therefore I'm amortizing the $80 cost of the scooter over this many hours and blah, blah, blah. And he made a really good point that for some reason it didn't occur to me at the time. And he was like, what can you do in 8 minutes?
Yep.
Like, he's like, you're not saving.
Yeah. You didn't accumulate those to then spend on something else.
Yeah. It's not like suddenly you have 3 more days of time. You just have a shitload of tiny, tiny chunks of time extra that
you probably wasted every day.
Yeah. That you probably didn't do anything with because it's only 8 minutes. And what the hell can you do in 8 minutes? Human beings tend to operate in blocks of time. And because we have to kind of like get mentally revved up and get our focus going. And
yeah, I think that is a much more worthwhile point than the whole like spreading it over time, is that if you're working on something, because if you're spending your entire weekend doing something that you want to become an expert in, right?
You're just in it.
That's a hell of a lot more effective than spending 30 minutes a day, because those 30 minutes really aren't 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes are
probably 5.
Depending on the complexity of the task, they're anywhere from minimum, roughly 30 minutes, to 5, because there's going to be a ramp up and a ramp down time of getting your brain and gear to do that thing. And so the bigger chunk of time you can get, you'd probably be much better off spending one day on your weekend than 30 minutes a day during the rest of the week.
Just throughout the week.
I mean, we used to have meetings. I remember we would have meetings, especially right after Quadrupus launched. We suddenly needed to start talking to a lot of people because the game did well enough that people were asking for interviews or just asking for review keys or whatever. And so we had a lot of these meetings, and then also local people in St. Louis were suddenly interested in what we were doing. And so we had meetings with tech people, with press people in the city that we would drive to and go do a thing. And I remember I don't know if you remember this, Seth, but the first like 3 weeks post launch, we had just a spattering of meetings every day across the whole workday, to the point
like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there.
Yeah, and we're actually going physically to these places most of the time too. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible because we also were trying to get a bunch of work done at the same time. And we just couldn't. You'd get these little gaps like that, basically the scooter gap, where you're like, sweet, all right, we got 16 minutes. Can we, is there anything we could bang out? And the answer is always no. I can send I'll send 2 emails, but that's the extent of, I don't even have time to think about the situation in this one email, which is more than a 18-minute thing for me to think about and do. So I think there is a very good point there, which is that not all time is equal. Right.
Yeah.
Which is why my suggestion to people, whatever they're like, I want to go do a thing, is always to do it in the morning. Do it first thing in the morning
when
you
get
fresh, or buy yourself, get yourself an extra half hour or hour in the morning
when nothing can interrupt you yet.
Yeah. And it's just so much easier at the end of the day to be like, well, I'm tired and the kids are home and haven't seen my wife all day. It's much easier to be like,
spend an entire day on your weekend doing.
Yeah. As your day gets closer to a close, you have more and more reasons to not do stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we talked about this enough. Jesus.
Yeah. Let's go on to questions.
Yeah, Jesus.
Jesus, quit making us talk about this stuff. All right. So the questions for our podcast come from podcast@bscotch.net. You can ask a question if you got a Bscotch ID and you'll get a perk. Also, you can do it if you don't have one. You just ask a question. You won't get a perk.
You can ask it anonymously.
You can do whatever you want. So just do your thing. Today we're going to talk about, first question is actually from Alan Falcon, which is, between the three of you, what's the single most mind-blowing event you've personally been witness to?
Personally?
As discussed previously, I have no recollection of any of it. So I'll let you guys answer this question.
Thanks for pointing out Adam's disability, Alan. It's really...
Well, we hadn't told him about him yet, so it's not
true.
Not totally.
I'm coming up empty on this. What about you, Sam? What is...
I think the wildest thing that I saw was I went to the Republic of Georgia my freshman year of college during that summer for a school thing. And this is in the Caucasus Mountains. This is in Eastern Europe. And we're running around there, and we got off of the subway, and we came out of the subway tunnel, and there was a dude who's just like chilling in his car, and a policeman ran up, opened the door, threw him out of the car, and then started hitting him with his stick. And it was
his
me
cop
and
stick.
His cop stick. And it was me and 4 other students. And I mean, I had never, of course, you've seen that stuff on TV before, people getting hit by, anybody. I haven't actually seen, I realized at that point, actual physical violence in a serious way being done in front of me, like within my person. So that was a really uncomfortable sort of like, oh, this is real. This is, when you see this happening to people, this is what it looks and feels like if you're around. And then we ran away. We ran back in the subway.
That's probably the right move.
So it was mind blowing. What was mind blowing about it?
I think when you have that shift from, it's like when you understand that the media that you've been consuming about a particular subject isn't just pictures on the television, and I think like this happens a lot nowadays.
Those are people. Yeah.
They're like, those are humans who a while ago, usually if it's in video form, like this is actively happening to. Or even, you see stuff like really beautiful pictures of landscapes and stuff all over the internet. But the truth is, if you actually go to that place with your body, it's a very different experience. And I think that was that sort of that schism for me, as I realized that, the stuff that you're reading about, the stuff you're seeing about, is very different when you experience it bodily than if you're just kind of taking it in either visually or, some other way.
What about people who go to places like, the Grand Canyon or whatever, these really, really scenic places, but they spend most of the time looking at it through the screen of their
They
smartphones.
convert it into a two-dimensional.
So they can take pictures.
This always makes me sad at concerts. If you go to a concert and people are
just
holding up
their
iPads, and I'm like, you're like, it looks like a cookie sheet, like it's big enough that it's just like a big cookie sheet, and they're watching the concert through that thing. And it makes me sad because I'm like, I feel like you're not
there. You might as well watch a damn YouTube video of it.
Yeah, if I do that, I know I'm not. It doesn't feel the same.
You're archiving the experience to not look at it in the future instead of just enjoying the experience while you're there.
Right.
I wonder if this is why the thing is, like, now that I know about my whole visual memory thing, it makes me sort of question my own internal motives for all of my behaviors and stuff. And one of those is that I don't give a fuck about pictures, like even a little bit. I have no photo archives of just about anything. I don't keep pictures of people. Like I just.
But see, to me, this is weird because
you
should go the other way.
Well, maybe though, right? But when because like, what happens when you look at a picture where you you look at a picture of an event, for example?
Because that's a good question.
Because for you, what that probably does is it causes that event to be conjured into your mind, and then you can remember bits and pieces of it, and remember maybe a sequence of events. For me, I'm just like, this is just a picture of an event, right? It doesn't transport me back there.
Yeah, it's the same as that idea of sub-vocalizing a phone number repeatedly so you can remember it, right? If you see a picture of something, it refreshes.
It'll just trigger everything.
It brings that memory back to the surface. But if you just don't have a memory,
but if I don't have it, then what's
you're just like, what is this? Who are
the
these
point?
People?
Yeah, I wonder. Weird.
All right. Next question comes from Frog Ninja.
This one better be less serious. Jesus. What are we even doing?
Metroidvanias. Love them or hate them? Let's talk about it.
Somebody tell me, what the fuck is a Metroidvania?
That's a good question. I don't know, Seth.
As far as I understand, a Metroidvania is a video game that is typically a 2D platformer, so side view with lots of gravity and shit like that. And it mostly involves exploring or doing stuff in order to find or unlock new capabilities that allow you to backtrack in some way and access new areas that were previously inaccessible.
Would that make Ori and the Blind Forest a Metroidvania?
Yes.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Love them, hate them. Let's talk about it.
I think we've talked about this in the past. I think hating on a genre is always the wrong move. And I think the good example here is if you were to, because what this genre does is it makes Metroid, presumably, and Ori and the Blind Forest the same game, or collapses them under the same header, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
True.
if you played both of those games, they don't feel anything alike, even though they share that similarity in the gameplay style. So I don't know. I would say I love Ori and the Blind Forest.
Yeah, I think it's called a Metroidvania because it's sort of both the original Metroid
and Castlevania.
Castlevania. They both had that same.
But
I think it's weird to define an entire genre by this because, like, in a lot of ways, Pokemon is a Metroidvania because there's a point where you see a tree and you're like, what is that? I can't get through there. And then later you get cut and you're like, oh, now I can go there, right? I mean, is the thing that defines a Metroidvania just
I think it's
the ability,
backtrack.
the ability to go back and get to a spot that you previously couldn't get to? Because otherwise,
I'm going to read about it on Wikipedia real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the defining feature to me.
Because that's a pretty weak defining element.
Well, I mean, it's exploration that requires backtracking at the end of the day. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah, that's
but
basically
why
what
is
Wikipedia
that?
says too.
Yeah, like why is that a thing that defines an entire genre when it's like such a tiny piece of?
I don't know, man. Humans are always like, I want to put stuff in a box. Could you put this?
I guess
in a
it's the
box
same
for me?
as the idea of the roguelike
or a
right?
platformer. Like platformer to me is the most hilarious and worst just description of a game because it just means you jump. That's all it means. It just means you jump a bunch of times.
Well, but on platforms. No,
but anything is a platform if you have to jump on it, right? So it's like whether it's the ground or actual platforms or some more interesting representation of those things, it's just you jumping on stuff, and that's how you get around in the world. But that fact, except for in something like Super Mario Brothers, where that's how you interact with everything is by jumping on it. But in lots of other games like that's how you get around. But it's not.
That's not the point of the game.
Yeah, it's not the point of the game. The point of the game isn't jumping around. It just seems like such a silly way to collapse a series of diverse entities.
Well, yeah, that's probably true of pretty much every genre.
or every
first person shooter.
Which I guess
so stereotype there is.
we can simply answer this question then in saying we love some of them and dislike to hate others.
But I personally, as far as like backtracking, I personally
not a big
hate
fan.
Backtracking.
Yeah,
just as my own thing. So I generally hate them. I played Ori the Blind Forest for a while. God damn, the game's beautiful. But yeah, backtracking, not a thing I enjoy.
I agree. As
It's
soon as
an
I had to
element-
backtrack, I stopped playing.
Yeah, I was like, oh, yep, now I got to walk for 2 minutes to go find this room with the thing in it that I saw earlier.
Yeah, it's because the area that you previously went through was interesting the first time because there were enemies and challenges in it.
Now it's just boring and empty.
Now it's just a time sink that you have to.
And you have to
slog
remember
through.
where it was. So now you have to like have this constant register of memory that's getting filled up with all the things that you didn't get to experience.
Metroidvanias, God.
Yeah,
Sam hates them.
In retrospect, I guess if a Metroidvania is purely defined as you having to go back to places you've already been in a more boring way than it was the first time, then not
just
a
to
fan.
get to the next level, basically.
Yeah.
So,
Right,
so a
next-
Metroidvania is a level-based game where there's a really, really long, boring part in between each level.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed, and I was playing Fallout. I was playing Fallout 4 over the weekend. I noticed this with the
It's
new WoW
also a
dungeons
Metroidvania.
too. Yeah, there's a lot of
Yes.
that. But an interesting note is if you look at their level design, like inside buildings and stuff, and this is true with the new WoW dungeons and things, is usually now they build them such that when you go to
They loop
leave,
back.
yeah, you actually loop all the way back right to the entrance. So like the final boss fight takes place somewhere where then you like jump on a ledge or jump into a hole or something, and it just drops you right where like the beginning of the dungeon was.
Yeah.
Because that walk back for 10 fucking
Just the
minutes through a
worst.
labyrinth, just the worst. Just the worst. thing.
Especially
Actually,
when
I-
you're basically overweight because of all the shit you're carrying. And so then every time you step and find something that you already threw down, you're like, oh, should I pick this thing up and throw something else out of my inventory?
Yep.
Yeah.
I will say though, Sam, that you're actually thinking of a different time in WoW back when you walked.
Yeah.
Now you just teleport back out of the dungeon.
Yeah. It's not a thing anymore.
But
All right.
the idea is there.
Next question comes from Nils0077, who asks, hey guys, what's your
Hey.
opinion on missable achievements or perks in games? And are any of those in your games? So in other words, I'm assuming missable doesn't mean like the player can just overlook it, but rather that they get somehow locked out of getting it.
Yeah, I think the idea here is that you can't get it for some reason.
So for example, if we had like an early access perk or something, like if you bought
Yeah.
the game in the first week, then you got some other cool thing. And then if you didn't, then go deal with it because you didn't get it on time.
I like them
I like 'em
because I think they are. A lot of players have this idea that for some reason they should get to have everything, just because they want it, and I don't think you should. I think if you were there the whole time and were supporting the game from the beginning and were an Uber fan and did everything and bought the early access and did all the bosses on the hardest mode before they got nerfed or whatever, sure, you can have an achievement for
I
that.
have a different take on this.
What's that, Adam?
Because here's the thing, like I agree on the first blush with that idea. However, when a person who's got really into a game before it came out and was involved in the whole process and so on, they got to do that because they knew about it and got the chance to be excited about it. Now take a new fan of the game after it launches who'd never heard of your studio or your game or whatever. Your game launches and of course there's a lot of hype and so they get in on it. And now they're so excited by your studio and your games that they want to have like absolutely everything to do with it, and basically are now bummed that they missed out on the opportunity to do all that cool stuff and unlock all those fun rewards and so on.
Yeah, but as long as you present more opportunities for them to get in on other things that people in the future won't be able to come back to and get.
Right.
Then they still get to get that feeling of, being in at the ground level or whatever. So I'm thinking about the, vanilla WoW, the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj event. There was this special mount that one person on the server could get, and it was associated with this one-time event that would only ever happen one day on each server forever, as the only time it would happen. And if you saw that person walking around on that mount, it was
Magical.
mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe to answer Alan Falcon's question, the most mind-blowing thing I ever saw was somebody walking around on that mount because, but I mean,
okay, wait.
for me, the only disappointing thing about it was that kind of thing never happened again, and it was super cool to see it. And I knew that I would never get to be a part of it because I wasn't that involved in it. But at the same time, it was really impressive and interesting to see.
I mean,
other
So
people.
that's
the
cool though,
idea.
but that's part of that's the history within the game, right? Where the game has one-off events that players who are there for the event get to participate in. And in principle, those kinds of events could continue to happen in the future.
Right.
When you have a standalone game that just is the way it is, which is most games, including ours, and you
I have a solution for you.
huh.
Which is you do cycled ones. So rather than having achievements be permanently missable, which is what Seth's talking about, and which I think is totally awesome for games that have ongoing development cycles, like something like an MMO or any multiplayer content. What you do is you perform cycled events. So think about a holiday. A holiday is your classic cycling event, right? Where every single year at the same time it happens, it has the same theme, same ridiculous stuff, maybe some extra ridiculous stuff, especially in games.
A lot
and
of
if you're
games do this
around,
too.
because it's fun and it's unique. And if you get something during that week, I mean, like the value of that thing is really high, right? Because it's actually super rare on the general time scale of the game. It's a symbol that you were around, and then if someone wants to get it, they can still get it. They'll just have to wait till next year,
Right.
or actually,
Right.
or
So
actually
it's
come
still
to the next
possible.
event.
Well,
Yeah.
in a more
I think that
abstract
feels good.
sense, if someone's really into your studio, if you have like a early backer or early access or beta testing or whatever kinds of rewards, if those aren't game specific, so that or I mean the reward itself could be game specific, but the getting of that achievement could be generic, so that if I was a beta tester of Crashlands, I would get it, and then I would never be able to be a beta tester of Crashlands again and also get it. But the next game launches, or is getting ready to release, if you're a beta tester in that game, you would also get the other rewards for beta testing games.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let me slap you with a hypothetical
Okay,
situation. Okay, so we make a game.
Okay.
The game has
it's not very hypothetical yet. Continue.
it has boss fights in it. Okay, and it is a gear-based game or level-based. It's an RPG of some sort. Meaning it's possible for the player to get stronger just through the sheer numbers that their character produces, thereby making lower level content obsolete. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the game is in essentially a static place and we have a bunch of achievements in it where, if you defeat this one particular boss in under 1 minute or something, you get this super, super crazy, awesome achievement that gives you an amazing item or something. Then we release the expansion to the game, which adds a new tier of content, allowing players to get much, much stronger.
This
So
is
the
getting real specific, but
Okay,
Yeah.
so the people who defeated that boss when it was actually a challenge, do you feel like their achievement is being taken away from them by now allowing everybody to just go one-shot that boss shortly after the expansion comes out? Because now everybody is super powerful.
that just sounds like a design failure on the part of the developers.
Yeah,
In your hypothetical game that you just developed in your mind, I'd say you fucked it up.
Okay, that's
I
fair.
mean, I would say
As
yes
I've seen
and
this
no.
happen a lot in
in
a lot of RPG style.
Well, that's
games.
kind of the classic problem with adding additional content, right? Is that you have to make previous content invalid in an RPG, right? Because you can just run around and one-shot things. Which, by the way,
assuming the players get more powerful. Yeah.
it is actually very fun to do as a thing. So I think again, it comes down to a time thing where it's like, if I got the achievement the week before that patch came out and it took me like 3 months to do, and then the next day, some scamps goes in there and just whacks him with this new fancy mace, kills it, then I'd be like, well, my achievement means nothing now. But if I did it like a year before that, it's kind of a time, I guess it's always just a time question where if I got to bask in the
How long?
glory of
How
an
long have
achievement,
you
right,
gotten to be proud of yourself?
that's the question. I think that's the very important question.
Yeah, to me, this is just a design problem. This isn't a problem about like whether a thing should be given as an achievement and then invalidated in the future once the condition. It should just be, if you think it's important for the player to view defeating that boss as an achievement, it should never feel like anything less than an achievement.
Ooh, I have an
Achievements
idea.
themselves as a like a tack on thing completely aside.
I have an idea. So to me, really, the problem is with calling something an achievement.
Yeah.
Because if you get a hammer that just one-shots a boss and you just walk up to it and do that, there is no...
You've achieved nothing.
You've achieved nothing, right? So what it should be is that anything that is I don't know what you'd call it, a perk,
You turn off the
an
achievement
award.
before.
Yeah. So basically, you get credit for having done it, but you don't get to list it as one of your achievements, if that makes sense. It's not because it's not one. It's just not an achievement, right? I mean, let's be
You
real.
didn't do jack shit.
Yeah, you leveled
that
up.
idea.
The end. It's a no. It's a no achievement.
All right, we're going to end with 2 quick questions. First one from FB Gaming. Do you think you will answer this question?
Nope.
Next one from Kakichan 2. Would you ever consider recording your farts and using one of the sounds as a sound effect for a character in a game of yours that you made? His second sentence is, I just did a pretty rad fart that would have been an amazing character set.
The most interesting part of this question is that he farted, and then his immediate thought was, this would be a great character sound.
I wonder what abominable noise.
What I'm actually the most interested in here is the phrasing he used, which is not that I farted, but that I just did a rad fart. How do you do a rad fart? What does that even mean?
Well, you wouldn't say I just radly farted or I just farted pretty rad. You know,
I
feel like you have
farted
to.
Pretty
and
radly,
it
though.
sounded amazing.
I think it's a good place to wrap it up.
He did a rad fart.
All right, well, thanks again for listening to Coffee with Butterscotch. This has been episode number 50. If you want to get in on any podcast action, go to podcast.bscotch.net. Otherwise, everything else is at butterscotch-shenanigans.com. And we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.